Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. We're going to start looking at the territories of professional wrestling. And on this episode, we're going to look at the Pacific Northwest Wrestling. And Jack, let's start it off.
Pacific Northwest Wrestling started in the early 1920s when a former world middleweight and world light heavyweight, the Australian version, wrestling champion by the name of Ted Tyne came to Portland with plans to promote both boxing and wrestling. Tyne hired Herb Owen as his assistant. While Tyne was on a trip home to Australia, Owen had the ownership of the company put in his name. Due to rules in effect within the state of Oregon at the time, Owen now had sole rights to sponsor all boxing and wrestling within the state. Herb Owen started out just promoting boxing matches, but soon began promoting wrestling matches as well, focusing on lightweights. During this time, sons Don and Elton Owen began helping their father in the family business, helping set up cards and even stepping into the ring on occasion to box or wrestle. During the early years, Herb brought in boxer Jack Dempsey. According to Barry Owen, Don's son, Dempsey even refereed some matches for Owen. And unknown to many at the time, a guy named George Wagner worked for Owen early in his career. While in the PNW, Wagner developed the character for which he would become famous, Gorgeous George. Wagner is reported to have married his first wife in the ring before a match in Eugene, Oregon.
We got to stop there for just a second because we got to discuss this. So that Ted left. He left to go to Australia. He went back to Australia, and there's a big story of why he went back, and we'll talk about that. But we won't get into the particulars of why he left.
Was it a phone call?
There was a phone call.
It was a phone call.
Do y'all remember when we talked about an antitrust thing that happened in professional wrestling at some point?
Yeah.
Well, that must have happened a lot in professional wrestling for some reason. Well, he gets caught up into that, so he goes back to Australia for a while, and that's when I guess Herb said, "Well, he's gone. I guess I need to be the promoter here." But I'm just thinking, though, you know, at some point he had to come back and go, "Okay, I'm ready to promote wrestling again."
He said, there's only one problem with that. I'm the promoter here now.
You have to move on. I thought that was an interesting story that happened. All right, Rodney, go ahead.
All right. In 1942, following his death, Herb's son Don took over the company. And in 1944, Don Owen promoted several cards with women wrestlers until female wrestling was outlawed in Oregon, as it would last until 1975. The National Wrestling Alliance was formed in 1948 with Don Owens as one of the founding members. This started the beginning of what became known as the NWA Pacific Northwest Wrestling, of course, Portland Wrestling. On July the 10th, 1953, Don Owens started what was the first regular professional wrestling program on television. Pacific Northwest Wrestling aired a weekly 60-minute live program originally called Heidelberg Wrestling, named for its sponsor, Heidelberg Brewing Company of Tacoma, Washington. The show was initially broadcast on KPTV, but moved to the rival KOIN TV in 1955. Along with the move came the show's new name, Portland Wrestling.
If I'm not mistaken, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but he had all women wrestlers. Was that during World War II?
41, right, was when it started. Yep. So 41 to 45.
Yep.
And I believe that's the reason he started having women wrestlers. So
makes sense.
So he didn't have that many men. They were probably over fighting the war. So he had all women wrestlers, and it got outlawed. And so what's so funny is it took to 1975 to not be outlawed. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't allowed in New York at Madison Square Garden until either 72 or 75.
Wow. That's incredible. All right. In the 1950s were good to Portland wrestling, seeing wrestlers such as Ed Francis, Gory Guerrero, the father of Hector, Chavo, all kinds of Guerrero people.
Yeah.
Tony Bourne, Matt Bourne's father, come to the territory. During this time, John Harrison, Harry Elliott, a former Oregon State University wrestling champion, later the school's wrestling coach, began working for Don Owen as a referee and putting on spot shows in the territory. By the way, spot shows, little towns, could be high schools, could be the National Guard Army. Any little place would be considered a spot show. In 1958, Elliott attained a contract with CBS Television to broadcast Seattle-based wrestling matches throughout all of Washington and parts of Alaska, British Columbia, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and Wyoming. Elliott promoted these matches as well as spot matches throughout the Washington, Idaho, and northeastern Oregon, while Don continued to handle the bookings for these matches. After the opening of Portland Memorial Coliseum in 1961, Don Owen occasionally promoted wrestling cards at the venue, drawing great crowds. In 1966, Harriet Elliott promoted, and Don Owens booked one of the biggest matches ever in Seattle, packing out the Seattle Center of 15,500 fans to see Lou Thesz beat Gene Kiniski.
And in 1967, Portland Wrestling returned to KPTV. That year, management changed within CBS Television, and PNW's original broadcast wrestling show was dropped, which subsequently led to Harry Elliott's retirement in 1968. Frank Bonama, an on-air personality at KPTV's sports department, took over the announcing duties at that time, serving as the voice of Portland Wrestling before his untimely death on October 5th, 1982, at only 49 years of age. Despite losing its regional broadcast television program in 1967, Portland Wrestling was still doing well. In 1968, Owen bought and renovated a bowling alley at 8725 North Chappaqua Boulevard and North Portland, which became the Portland Sports Arena and the new home of Portland Wrestling. In the 1970s continued to be good to Portland Wrestling, with the addition of such superstars as Playboy Buddy Rose, Matt Bourne, Ed Wiskowski, Roddy Piper, Jesse Ventura, Lonnie May, Jimmy Snuka, and Stan Stasiak. In 1976, Dutch Savage bought into Don Owen Sports and began promoting cards in the state of Washington.
Wow. All right. The Owens production faced opposition from several outlaw promotions throughout the 1970s, but remained strong. Eventually, Owens' reputation as honest and well-paying promoter drew a more national level of talent to the PNW territory. As the roster grew, so did the number of shows. In addition to sports arena tapings and a regular weekly stop in Salem, Oregon, it was not uncommon for the territory to run spot shows every night of the week. For several years during the 1970s and 1980s, PNW's Portland Wrestling program was syndicated in an edited 60-minute version known as Big Time Wrestling and was shown on stations throughout the Pacific Northwest. The television production was rather basic, even by 1970 standards, and it went to color in 1972. And even then would occasionally be in black and white. Maybe that's because they didn't pay the bill. I don't know. If KTV was airing Portland Trailblazers home games on Saturday night, as the station had the only one color production truck. So, okay, they only had one production truck, so occasionally they have to go black and white. Between 1976 and 1985, Playboy Buddy Rose became famous for drawing more money than any other wrestling in history of Portland wrestling. In 1982 and 1983, Rose wrestled for the WWF. But on his days off would return to Northwest and worked one-night stands for Don Owen.
As a team, Rose and Ed Wiskowski became the NWA World Tag Team Champions. I'm gathering that would have been their versions of
Their
that.
version of yes.
Defending title matches up and down the West Coast for Don Owen, Roy Shire, and Los Angeles promoter Mike LaBelle. Beginning in the late 1970s, Rose feud with Rowdy Roddy Piper in a multi-year long angle, with the highlight being Rose stealing Piper's kilt and burning it in the Sports Arena balcony press row in 1981. Fans watching the match on TV called 911, and the fire department was dispatched to the building, only to find when they arrived at the Sports Arena, it was in fine condition. Shows were shot live to tape at the time with little editing, and commercials inserted while the program was being shot. Wrestling on television became a hot commodity during the 1980s. In 1982, Elton Owen, who had continued working in the family business as his brother's Don's right-hand man, retired. Elton died a short time later. Don's son, Beryl Owen, began promoting in Washington. He would then take over promoting the weekly Friday night shows in Eugene, as well as the spot shows, eventually promoting most of the shows which had previously been promoted by Elton. Frank, now how do you say that name?
Bonama?
Bonama?
Yeah.
Was admitted to the Emmanuel Hospital on September 25th, 1982, after suffering a heart attack. He would not return to his Portland wrestling hosting duties, dying 10 days later. On October 9th, veteran announcer Don Koss, who had filled in as a host during this time, officially took over the announcing duties. Koss had previously announced television wrestling matches in Salem, Oregon, over the defunct station KVDO. Before we move on, I think we need to explain what an outlaw promotion is for wrestling fans that may not know. At the time, there was regular wrestling shows that might be sanctioned by the National Wrestling Alliance. If they were not sanctioned by the National Wrestling Alliance at the time, they would be considered an outlaw wrestling company. Today, they would be called independent wrestling. Back then, it was an outlaw promotion. All right, Jack.
Wrestlers such as Portland native Billy Jack Haynes appeared for the company. Others, such as Roddy Piper, King Parsons, Matt Bourne, Gentleman Chris Adams, Rip Oliver, Buddy Rose, David Schultz, and others competed regularly. Owen had a working relationship with Jack Atkinson's world-class championship wrestling promotion in Dallas, which produced several talent exchanges, the most famous of which was when Adams and Parsons were sent to World Class in 1983. Both wrestlers became two of the most famous non-Von Erich wrestlers in the promotion's history and became Texas mainstays throughout the rest of their respective careers. On May 21st, 1985, in honor of the Owens family's 60 years of promoting, a supercard called 60th Anniversary Wrestling Extravaganza was held at the Portland Memorial Coliseum. The show featured representatives from the NWA, AWA, and WWF, including the world champions of both the NWA and AWA and the world tag team champions of the AWA, all defending their titles. The PNW accomplished on this card something that WWF, WWE had yet to achieve, a sold-out Coliseum. Barry Owen claimed that this event had the highest attendance ever for a sporting event at the Coliseum. The show saw the final match in the Buddy Rose, Rowdy Roddy Piper angle as its main event. Just weeks after both men appeared in the first ever WrestleMania. Rose in the opening match as the masked executioner, and Piper was in the main event against Hulk Hogan. Piper received a hero's welcome from the capacity crowd and pinned Rose to end their long and winding feud.
January 21st, 1986, Portland Wrestling held a follow-up to the supercard called Superstar Extravaganza, also at the Portland Memorial Coliseum. The card was limited to NWA talent and was not as large and successful as the first supercard. Decline of Pacific Northwest Wrestling. The PNW took a number of hits in the late 1980s. Changes to a centralized Oregon Boxing and Wrestling Commission began to affect the industry and through new rules and fines levied at wrestlers and promoters. Additionally, the expansion of the WWF and WCW into national promotions with the nationwide television deals ran most local and regional wrestling concerns out of business. This left few territories for younger wrestlers to develop their skills, especially earlier in their careers, thus leaving very green talent for a non-national promotions. By 1987, Don Owens was the only remaining member of the original NWA group.
You know, it's when you look at this, evidently the Oregon Boxing and Wrestling Commission was truly a hard group because I don't even think the WWF would run there.
No, they couldn't. When you get through this last part, I'll tell you my experience with them.
You know, so we'll look at that. In 1987, Len Denton, working for Don Owen, became the first booker for Pacific Northwest Wrestling while still developing who would become stars of the future, such as Art Barr, Scotty the Body. Later, you would be Raven, and I can't remember what he wrestled in WCW.
Scotty Flamingo.
Yep, Scotty Flamingo.
Scotty Flamingo. CW at Bergstorm, which I don't know if I know who that is. Steve Dahl and Rex King. King. Yeah, all them great guys. Scotty, recognized as a good talker, was eventually used as Cost's wisecracking, making broadcast partner without new talent and other reasons, mostly lack of good sponsors. Business continued to slide. The 1990s came around. In 1991, Pacific Northwest Wrestling's main television sponsor, Tom Peterson's, declared bankruptcy despite remaining the highest rated locally produced show aired in Portland television market. Portland Wrestling was canceled in December of 1991 after 38 continuous years as a weekly program. When the show was canceled, it was the longest running non-news show on television and the third longest overall behind Meet the Press and CBS Evening News. It's still one of the top 20 longest shows on television. Don Owen continued to run wrestling shows throughout Oregon and Washington until April 30th, 1992. When he retired, he sold the entire company, minus the sports arena, to the Portland Wrestling referee and future promoter, Sandy Barr. The Portland Sports Arena, as well as the former supermarket building next door, which was used by Barr for the flea market he ran, was eventually acquired by a local church. All right, Jack. Give us your opinion of the Oregon.
Well, I was doing some shows. I had an opportunity when we went to California that time. But I also had a side hustle I was working on with a group of Samoans there. And they had me hooked up with a sponsor. But the kicker to that, for running shows out there regular, was he wanted Oregon. And we contacted them after I got back home. I contacted the athletic commission up there and was just told bluntly, no. And I said, well, you know, what are the requirements? And the guy said, no. No is the answer. No is the answer to every question you ask. We do not want wrestling here. And that was it. That killed my whole deal of being able to go back out there.
That's crazy. Here is a photograph. Roddy Piper at the old sports arena in Portland, Oregon. Also, here's a picture of Don Owen and Barry Owen. They were the two promoters that promoted for years. And here is a photograph of evidently they did the interviews in the on an upstairs portion of this, and this is where they're at doing the interviews. You know, it was a great little show. If people haven't watched it, you can watch it. Pacific Northwest Wrestling. I think it's on YouTube, isn't it, Jack?
Yes, I think there are a lot of episodes out there.
And here's the tag team champions. Here is Buddy Rose and Ed. What was his name again?
Murkowski.
Yeah.
Did y'all ever see him wrestle? I'm not for sure I've ever saw him.
Okay.
Yeah, he was Colonel De Beers in the AWA.
Well, now I know who he is. That makes some sense.
Yeah.
But we hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a big thumbs up. Subscribe to the page and go one step further. Hit that notification bell, and we'll talk. What was that?
That was the notification bell.
That was the notification bell. So hit that notification. That's what you're going to hear. We will talk more about Pacific Northwest Wrestling. We're going to try to find somebody that actually lived in that area that can help us out with that, because we did not get to watch that show while it was on. And so there's got to be somebody that was there and watched it all the time. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next video right here on Pro Wrestling Inside Now.